We started this job a year ago. This massive hole is going to be a sunken seating area, and it began with a digger.
We're creating a horseshoe seating area with a fire pit in the middle.
And one of the major problems with having something down inside of the ground is water. So as well as the drainage, we need to also consider the fact that the UK is cold pretty much most of the year. One of our solutions is we're using a French drain or a perforated pipe. And the way that works is it's buried below the finished surface, and it's going to take any of the water away from inside that seating area. So once that was in, we shuttered up the edges for our retaining wall that's also the seating itself.
So as you can see, we've poured the footings at 300mm deep, and then we've let it dry and removed the shuttering. We have laid a weed membrane down the centre, and then we've filled it up with 250mm of stone.
With the footings in, it was time to place an order with MGN and get all of our concrete blocks delivered.
Our next step is to build a retaining wall, and I've brought in a little bit of help from DB Builders. This is Dan, and he's going to give us a hand.
Most of you by now would have recognised DB or Danny Boy, so we got him in to help us lay our concrete blocks. First job was to set up our spot boards, and that's what's going to hold our mix. And we are using a 4-in-1 mix for our blocks.
Now it's time for us to get the blocks in, and Dan's going to start laying away.
And that's exactly what Dan did. So we got laying, we're laying our blocks on their side, and remember, these are concrete. We need that extra strength to help retain all of the dirt that's around our seating area, because obviously we're down inside the ground. So we get laying, we're laying 2 courses, and then we're half bonding just to give it that extra strength.
So now we worked out our back and our finished height, we're now going to pull the sides in to meet the front section.
So when building a wall, you normally build up your corners and then you pull the straight sections in using your lines, and that's exactly what we did. With our 2 bits of wall in, it was time to start looking at our steps. So we did this separately so that we still had access down into the hole. And once the main walls were done, we dug the rest, and that's where the steps are going to be. It was then time to call in TJ Cottis to remove all of the soil that we had dug out from that seating area. With a mess cleared up, we could get on with the rest of the block work. So the steps went in first, and then it's time to start looking at the fronts of our seat. Right, so since we laid the block work for our stairs and the rest of our walls, we've now started to infill the back with a lean mix or a dry mix. So this is concrete, but it's just no water in it. And we're just going to fill up right to the top of each gap, so gaps in the stairs and gaps in the walls. Before we got to the very top, we needed to pull in some conduit, and that conduit is going to be taking the cables for our LED lighting that we're going to be installing in a little while. Once those were in, we could top up the concrete, but this time we was using a wet mix so we could get the top nice and smooth, ready for our porcelain tiles that are going to be laid over this whole seating area.
Before we start any of the works, I'm actually going to be preparing the porcelain tiles in the seating area by adding a bullnosed edge. So we're going to be using this attachment that goes in the grinder, and it creates that shape in the porcelain.
So we hit up Harry from HH Tiling and got a load of tile bits sent out, including this bullnosing bit. And this tool is absolutely amazing for creating custom pieces like this bullnosed porcelain. And to do it, all you need to do is run it back and forth until you get the shape.
I'm also going to be drilling a hole before I start to run some cables, but that's going to become a lot clearer later on in the video.
And no, your eyes are not deceiving you. Brad is actually doing some work.
The reason why we run them cables in is because we're actually heating these seats. We believe that no one's ever done it before, so we're actually testing it out on this one. And our first job is getting some primer down.
And the primer we're using is Ultra Tiles Pro Primer. So the first coat is going to be a 3-in-1 mix, making sure we get every single inch of this job covered in that primer before then mixing up a second coat, which is going to be a 1-to-1. And to apply it, we're using a 4-inch foam roller. While we're waiting for the first coat of primer to dry, we're actually going to change the design ever so slightly, and that is to create an angle on the back, and we're going to do that by creating some furrings and attaching them to the wall. So when I say furring, that is basically a piece of timber that goes from nothing up to the desired thickness that we want for the angle on the seats. Why have you got goggles on?
Safety.
Well, you're not doing anything.
Yeah, watching you work. I have to have safety.
So once Brad had acquired the correct PPE for viewing, I got on with creating a jig for our furrings. The reason I'm using a jig is because I want each one to be identical so the seat matches all the way through.
Now that the first coat's dry, we're actually going to jump on and get the second one on.
So like I said previously, unlike the first coat, this one is a 1-to-1 coat, so it's a lot thicker than the first. While the second coat is drying, we're actually going to be cutting down some backer board. So this is a backer board. It's to be tiled on, and the only reason we're installing this is because we need a layer of insulation between the blocks and the heat mat we're going to be installing. These boards are super easy to install, so we sit them in position ready to cut them down to size, and the way these are cut is just using a Stanley blade. They're super easy to install, so we get on with cutting them all down, but we're not fully installing them, remember, because the primer is still wet.
Now that they're all cut in, I'm going to place them on top in position where they go until that primer has fully cured.
We got on with removing all of the balls and putting them on top so that that primer could dry before mixing up Ultra Tiles Pro Flex Rapid Adhesive. The reason we're using Rapid is we want this to set off, and it's quite easy to get these in quick time. So we trowel it out using a 6mm notch trowel as spec'd, and then we start to apply our boards, making sure that they're nice and flat on our seating area, and that we have full coverage on every single board, because each tile is only connected to those. That's our backer board stuck down using the Ultra adhesive. We can now move on to the little furrings that we created. When we cut these furrings, we made sure we had enough to have a maximum of 400mm spacings, pretty much like everything you build in timber. We then stuck them to the wall using some power grab and bond from C-Tech, and then we also added some mechanical fixings. So we used concrete screws, so you don't have to use plugs with those, it goes straight in, and then that adhesive's going to help hold the top half where it's not quite thick enough for the fixings.
Before I put the backs on, I'm actually going to go round and mark the centre of each furring.
The purpose of those marks is so that we know where to put our fixings, because we're using mainly mechanical fixings when attaching these to the back, because we've got those timber furrings. So just like the bottoms, we cut them all down using our Stanley blade, making sure it's a nice tight fit to the top before getting ready to fix them into position. So we make a nice plumb line up the top, and we also add a bit of adhesive where the furrings get a little bit too thin for the screws and washers. These screws and washers are designed specifically for this job, and they are stainless steel, so they're not going to rust in the future.
We've come across a little problem with fixing them, and there's a little bit of flex at the top where we can't get a fixing.
To overcome the problem, we mixed up a little bit more of that rapid adhesive, and that's going to create a bond at the very top where the blockwork meets those insulation boards. So we get on with attaching everything using adhesive and the mechanical fixings. All of this was supplied by Fast Warm, which is part of the heating system we're going to be using. So once they were all on, we cleaned it all up with a hoover and applied Fast Warm's waterproof tape on all of our joints.
Now that that's all taped up, we're going to get on and prime it.
Just like the block work, our boards need to be primed. So the first coat is a 3-in-1 mix. We then let that dry before moving on to a 1-in-1 mix, so it's fully primed. While the primer is drying, we're actually going to cut down our Fast Warm Fast Grid into sections ready to be installed onto the seating. So this matting looks very similar to your typical decoupling mat. The only difference is it's full of grids that are going to take the wire that's going to heat our seating. So to install it, we rolled it out into sections, and then lined it up ready to be trimmed to its final size using a Stanley blade. And the thing that we're checking here at all times is that all of our grids line up, because we need to run our cables all the way around the corners, including from the bottom to the top. Once the grids were lined up, we could then cut out a bit of trunking that's going to take two things. One, the heater itself, and two, the probe that's going to tell us the temperature of our seats. That's all of our matting cut to size. Now what we're going to do is mix up some ultra adhesive and stick the matting to the backer ball that's underneath. Brad then got hold of the whisk, unfortunately, and started to try and mix up our adhesive. Oh, look at me. I don't know what's going on. Once Brad had finished showcasing his absolute top quality skills, I got on with applying our adhesive to the seating area ready for that matting. So we will be using a 6mm notch trowel once again, and then we roll out our matting, but we don't just leave it there. We need to apply pressure to the whole mat to make sure we've got full contact the whole way through. And the way you can tell that is when you apply pressure using a flat trowel, the colour of the matting actually changes, so you can see the adhesive underneath. So I work my way around in sections, always making sure that our grids haven't moved and they're going to line back up when we pull through that cable. Because remember, if they don't line up, we're going to really struggle to pull it in, and that's the important part when it comes to heating our seats. Now that the matting has set, we can start looking at how we're going to heat it. So this is what's going to be heating our matting. It's a little cable and it gets fed into all these little grooves. And before that happens, we need to test our cable for continuity. With that done, we can get it pulled into the building where we're going to be installing our thermostat. And it's also where we're going to be getting our power from. So we feed it through our trunking and then we feed through our probe.
Now it's time to run our cables around the seating area. Well, I'm not, Lee is.
So like every job we do, we got someone else to do all of the hard work like normal. And don't worry, this isn't just some random we found on the street. This is Lee from Easy Bathrooms, and they're actually supplying all of the tiles that we used on this seating area. And you're going to see how amazing they look in just a little while. But before you see those, we need to get all of the cables pulled in. So we're setting our cables at 50mm. And just remember, when you order your kit, you need to know the exact length, because these can't be cut down. They come at a set size. So we worked out the exact length we needed and got it ordered from Fast Warm before installing it. And once it's all installed, it's very important that we recheck that cable for continuity.
Now that the testing's complete, we're going to start tiling.
So we're going to be starting with the tiling on the top, the seat area itself. But first we need to work out how much overhang we want. So when working out our overhang, we need to take into account the Allco LED track we're going to be installing, and also the thickness of the tiles that are going on the front. I think that's golden. And it really was golden. So I've got the tiles cut, and we're also going to be bullnosing the front. So we've cut all of the bottom tiles that are going to go on our seating area, but before we start installing them, I'm also going to be adding a little groove to stop any capillary action from the water. So the idea behind this groove is it stops water in its track when it tries to roll under. So we did a little demonstration just to show. You'll see the water goes all the way back up into the wall, but with that groove in place, it stops dead and drops down to the floor. So it's just going to prevent water getting underneath our seating area and causing any damage to the adhesive. With the tops all prepared, we moved on to putting some screws in the front. So these aren't staying, they're going to get removed, but we need them while we install the fronts to hold the weight of that tile while the adhesive sets. Once all our screws are in position, it was then time to line up our tiles and start getting them all cut into position. So we like to dry install, or basically lay them without any adhesive. They're just loose laid in position. So we start to cut everything we need to cut, including this little 45-degree mitre and the little square that we're having sat behind. And then all of the rest of the seating ready to be finally installed. That way, when we come to mixing our adhesive, We haven't got to worry about it setting before we're ready. So that is all of the tiles dry fitted, which means no adhesive. We've just sat them in place with our spacers. Now we can mix up some ultra adhesive and get them installed. Unlike the rest of the adhesive, this time we're using Ultra Tiles Pro Gel. That way we're going to have a little bit more time to lay our tiles. Teamwork really does make the dream work. Look at my gloves. I never wear gloves, but since Brad and Lee have been mixing, gloves feel like they are appropriate at this stage. Not that I'm ungrateful, but it probably was one of the messiest jobs I'd ever seen. So with my messy bucket of adhesive, I got on with troweling out our matting. Now, unlike normal installation, we're actually using the flat side of the trowel to install the adhesive on the mat, and then we're using the notch trowel on the tiles. The reason I'm doing that is because I don't want to risk damaging the cable that's going to be heating our seating area. So we're using HH's self-leveling clips, so basically they get slid underneath, but we're also using some 3mm spacers because the clips are 2mm and we wanted a 3mm space. So once you install the tile, you slide in the little wedge, and that's just going to make sure all of your joints are completely seamless when you come to installing your tiles. Because we're in the UK, it gets dark at about 12 midday. So last night, or last midday, it got a little bit dark, but we did get the top of the seats on. Now we're going to move on to the fronts. But before that happens, we need to remove all of the spacers we previously installed and knock out those clips.
It's time to start mixing some adhesive, and we're using the Ultra Tiles Pro Eco Gel, and it's from
Easy Bathrooms. And you're always going to find a local showroom because they have 144 nationwide. Despite previous efforts, I allowed Brad to mix up the adhesive once again, and to be fair, this try wasn't too bad. So unlike the seat itself, this time we're using the notch trowel on the wall and we're back buttering the tiles. And as well as adhesives, they also stock
a large selection of tiles, including large format.
As well as tiles, they also stock everything you're going to need for your luxury bathroom. Now you can see why we use the screws. That's going to help hold the weight of those tiles. We then jumped into Easy Bathrooms and grabbed ourselves a trade card. So if you are in the trade, make sure you ask in store about the benefits of their trade card. So because we're having LED lighting, so this is from Allco, we need to cut down the tracks. These come 2 meters, and we're going to be sliding them up and over the tile we're putting on the front. That's why they've all just been left, and then we'll level them up and push them up into this track. So the way Lee invented this track was so that it had a 20mm lip and it sits perfectly over our tiles. So we installed it using a bit of CT1, and then we push our tiles up to put a bit of pressure and squeeze that track into position. It was then time to move on to scribing our internals to make sure all of our joints lined up perfectly. So we're not bonding this, we want a nice straight joint from the bottom all the way up into the seating area, remembering to install our tracks as we go. One thing you will see us doing here is using a diamond blade to cut the metal. Remember, do as I say, not as I do. Use a proper metal cutting blade for those aluminium tracks, and it's going to be a lot easier and safer to cut.
So while Phil's getting that other cut in, I just want to let you know that we're using HH tiling tools on this job. So if you want any, the link is in the description below. Phil, what do you think of them? Mwah, they're really good. They're really good.
So we've got all of the bottom tiles in, up as far as we need to go, so just the seating area. And while I was doing that, Brad was actually doing something for once, and he's been cutting down the tiles ready to put the back on. And just like the bottom of the seating area, we've gone back to filling in the matting with the flat side of our trowel and then using the notch side for the tile itself. So when we're notch troweling the tiles, we're not using the 6mm anymore, we're actually using a 10. And if you can get a 12mm, that'll be even better. So we get all of our adhesive on and start to set in our tiles, remembering we want all of our joints to line up from top to bottom. Another job we had to do at this stage was start to drill out for our cables.
We're working through the night to get this video out, hopefully. so just make sure you subscribe.
Yep, unlike the summer, soon as it gets to 4 o'clock, it feels like it's about 11, so the days just felt super, super long. But we cracked on so we could get this job finished.
We have daylight back and we got near enough all the backs on apart from the harder one, and I'm going to show you how you work that one out.
So even though Brad calls this the harder one, it's not actually that difficult. You just need to measure the bottom, measure the top, and draw a nice straight line between the two marks, and that's going to give you the angle of the back of the seats.
That's all the tiling done for now. We're going to go around, knock off all the clips, have a clean up, and we're going to move on to the resin.
I will say this about HH clips, they are super easy to knock out, so anyone that does tiling will know that sometimes they get stuck. Like Brad said, we are having resin down on the floor of this seating area, and because we haven't personally laid any resin ourselves, we've actually got Mark from Resin Bonded, and he's going to be doing some on-site training with us.
Before we do any training, we're going to get a bit of prep done on the base, get it ready for the resin.
We then called up TJ Cottis because not only do they do grab lorries, they also do aggregates. They then dropped off a load of type 1 so we could top up our base because it was a little bit low compared to where we wanted our finished floor. Got that topped up, and we need to make sure it is super level because the prep is so important when doing resin.
We're going to whack it now.
And that's exactly what we did. We whacked it until it was fully compacted. So that's our type 1 in and compacted. We're actually going to be topping this up with a little bit of granite dust. That is not necessarily needed, but it's going to help us get our base absolutely spot on.
So we need a bit of grano dust for our resin, and we've actually called in a little favour from TJ Cottis, who's brought us it in less than 45 minutes.
I'm pretty sure that's quicker than most fast food orders I've made. So once we got our granite dust in, we started to level it off for the final time. Now the good thing about this is it's going to infill any small little gaps that you would get with type 1. I then made it absolutely perfectly flat before compacting it again with our brand new compactor that you may see a little bit later on in other videos. We then lay down our mesh and go and start to cut it all in. Now this little system here isn't always required.
So what you've just seen Phil install here is our mesh and go system. You wouldn't use mesh if you're using other bases like permeable concrete or tarmac.
With the base complete, it was time to start setting out ready for our resin. We're finally ready to start putting down some resin. So because we're having on-site training, Mark is going to talk us through the first mix, and then we're going to attempt to do some work for ourselves for a change.
So literally as they're stacked is how it goes in.
As you can see from Brad's face, nothing went in, but the important thing about this is being neat and very organised.
And then hit timer.
Getting to press the timer was probably the highlight for Brad. He loves pressing things. So they hit the timer and got that mix ready and out and into our barra before pouring it into position, where Mark then started to give me some on-site training. Now this stuff, I've tried it once for about 3 milliseconds, but this time I really paid attention, and what a lovely system to learn how to use.
Go slow to start with.
I didn't realise how much I'd actually enjoy this, so once I got into it and Mark had given me some pointers, it really started to become quite natural, and it's quite a quick system to learn how to use. So another little tip that Mark's give us, as we're laying the resin, every sort of 1 to 2 mixes, we're using Bandworks Easy Clean, and we're getting all of the excessive resin off of our trowel. That's just going to stop the resin going sticky and making troweling up.
Are you giving
harder.
his secrets away?
Oh yeah, if you want the rest, you have to go on his book. While Mark was teaching me how to lay the resin, and Tom was teaching Brad how to make the mixes and use the mixer. This may sound like a bit of a boring job, but actually it's just as, or if not, more important than laying the resin itself, as it needs to be done accurately.
Great success!
I'm basically qualified already.
He's a fast learner.
Look.
It was good. You're going to see him every business.
Great success!
He did very well.
No, I did good.
You did good. He did very well.
No, it's like this.
Very good.
Oh dear, it seems Brad is rubbing off on poor Anton. So while those two were messing around by the mixer, me and Mark got on with laying out the rest of the resin. So on our first mix, it was a standard mix as you would any other time, but on this one we've actually added something called Easy Trowel, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It makes it easy to trowel. So I haven't really laid a lot, but from that mix to this, in these sorts of temperatures, I can actually feel the difference. It's much easier to move around. And that's coming from someone with about 25 minutes of experience. So while Mark's trialling up the last little section, I just want to tell you about some of the courses available at Resin Bonded. They have the on-site that you've just seen, but they also do a more beginner version and an advanced course. So if you do want to look at some of the courses available, the link will be in the description below.
And now it's the night shift. So me and Phil are going to keep cracking on. The resin was laid about 2 hours ago, but we have to get the tiles on because we've got Allco coming tomorrow. So
time is of the essence.
We have no choice. Enjoy.
I mean, technically we do have a choice, but we are just a glutton for punishment. So while we rolled into the night, we got on with laying out more of those tiles. It's daytime again, so last night we stayed and got 3 of the steps out of 4 on, and we also got all of the LED tracks in because we've got Lee from Allco installing all of the LEDs.
Oh, well, thank you, Philip. But I'm not installing it. Adam is.
Even though Lee begged us not to put that clip in, I had to share it with you guys. I thought it was hilarious. So once we had finished joking around, Lee and Adam got on with starting to pull all of the cables for our LEDs. And lucky for us, the pull cords that we had installed over a year ago were still working.
The cable hole works.
Great success. Normally, this job would be the very final job to do, but because we're always in a rush, we're installing it before we've even finished the tiling. What Adam's doing now is installing the pre-made, so he's already made these strips up into the tracks that we installed. And while Adam's doing that, Lee is over the back installing the controller, which is going to control all of the LEDs. Unlike any of the LED lighting we've used before from Allco, this one is digital. So there's a bit more cabling and a little bit more programming that goes along with it. But the finished product that you'll see soon enough is absolutely amazing. Adam's making the final connections for our lighting, and while he's doing that, Lee is making some lighting scenes on the laptop that you'll see in just a minute. And also, Brad is doing what he normally does. Nothing. Lee then got on with creating some scenes while Adam wrapped up the last of the lighting cables. Everything has been pre-cut, so we're going to get on with installing the top. So this here was actually a bit of a disaster for a small while. We was originally going to bullnose and have a nice little overhang, but once we tried it, they just hurt your back. So we opted to lay the tiles flush with a small 5mm overhang, and that way it was a lot more comfortable when you were sitting in the seats.
We have Jack the Tiler here.
What's going on, everyone?
To help us with some of the difficult bits, because he does it for a living.
Not only does he do it for a living, it was also a fresh set of legs. We were starting to get worn out from this job, and Jack was a breath of fresh air.
To get this measurement, I'm not going to use a tape measure. I'm going to scribe all the way across the back of the tile.
And using that method, every single time he cut these tiles, they were a perfect fit.
It's really coming together now.
And after 7 days straight of nights, it really was coming together. And with the first piece of seating cut, it was time to move on to the external miters we needed to cut. So me and Jack are moving on with the tiles around the flower bed section. So these are going to be flower beds, and what we've come up with, because of the whole palaver with the miters, is we're going to follow it through, and we're going to continue all of our joints like this, and on the corners we've got an exact square, so we've got the same square on every single corner, so it all sort of ties in together.
Now that I've dry cut everything, we're going to start getting these tiles installed.
As you can see from the light in the background, like every other day on this job, it was getting late and it was getting very cold.
What I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be cutting these around the perimeter of the outside of this blockwork. Now I know this is going to look like it's finishing a little bit short, but actually the finished height of the garden floor is going to be here, not down here.
Like Jack said, eventually the garden tiling is going to run directly into the seating area. So it didn't matter too much about having those fronts go all the way down to the ground. So once he had cut them, we got on with installing the tops and the sides.
We are about to lay these last 3 tiles, which is going to finalise this project.
Jack stayed to the bitter end.
And it really was bitter. I believe at this stage it was about 1 degree and all of our hands were cold and wet, but like a true champion, Jack cracked on.
We stayed late last night and got all the tiling done. Poor old Jack stayed literally the whole night. I don't know what time he got home, but now it's time to move on the resin. We've had to make a temporary structure so it stays dry.
With our fantastic shelter in place, we needed to start protecting our resin floor so we can move on to the resin grout. Now, if you wasn't pushed for time like we was, you'd normally do this before the resin floor went down to save any chance of damage. But because we're always in a rush, we needed to protect it. So this isn't any old grout, this is resin grout and it's fully waterproof. The tarpaulin is still here and Alan hasn't run away, even though we give him a job that's nothing to do with his job. And as you can see, if you look round, it's very, very late again, because we love lates. So Alan is going to start sealing all of the little corners and it's going to make everything look lovely. Poor Alan turned up about 5 hours ready to do the sealant, and unfortunately we hadn't even done our grout. So he hung around, helped out before moving on to sealing this job so it could finally be complete. Oh, has anyone else noticed he's using a piece of wood? Why are you using the wood and not the tools?
Because you always get a better finish, and the little squeegee ones, you waste so much materials.
Fun facts.
Fun facts. Alan, aka Silright Sealants, did explain that you can use the tools, but for a professional, it's just a waste of material. Alan has done us a massive favour hanging around. It's super late. What a legend. So if you do need any sealants done in your bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchens, wherever you need it, hit him up, Silright Sealants. We will put his link below. I always find the sealing process fascinating as it changes the look of any job. So once Alan had completed his task, it was time to get in the thermostat that we needed for our under-seat heating.
Time to add some flowers to the sunken seating area.
And we call them flowers because we have no idea what they are. We just picked them because we like the colour. It was then time to call in the A-team to get our site cleared once and for all. And what a job they did. They left this place pristine.
So if you want to see if it actually works, so that's the top, it's not heated. And then aim it at that, which has got the temperature on, 23 degrees. Come on, and the bum. And then top, it works!
And that is the seating area complete. Thanks for watching. Just remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you later.
Love you, bye.
Maybe blinding me, just wait and see. Just wait and see. Just wait and see. To all the haters, those filled with jealousy, the naysayers, prayers for defeat. But we'll make ladders out of obstacles and stepping stones from roadblocks. Leap over the lines that say we won't cross. We'll shake hands like they're nothing. They won't